Hi and welcome to the 4th edition of the open source video blog. My name is Leonard. I'm a senior software engineer and an open source enthusiast. Live streaming is something that I'm still not used to. I'm still learning, so please excuse me if there are any issues during this live stream. As an open source enthusiast, I'm trying to keep an eye on the things happening in the open source ecosystem, and I decided to make these just very short live streams sharing some news that I think are valuable, happened with open source projects or companies working with open source. So I'm doing this just for fun. There are a lot of news that can be shared. Of course, I'm covering just a very, very small portion of them. So for today, I'm going to cover the news happened in July. It's almost the end of July. And of course, July and August are not the busy months. Most of the people are already thinking about vacations. However, July 2020 was interesting. There were some news that attracted my attention. So in the next approximately 20-30 minutes, we'll go through them. So here, the photo that you see here, the cover photo of the video is also interesting. The live stream covers both open source software and hardware. And on the photo, I have taken a picture of MinuBoard Max. This was a single board computer, a development board with Intel Atom CPU. The interesting thing is that this is an entirely open source hardware device. Unfortunately, this particular model, MinuBoard Max, as of today, I think it's no longer being manufactured. However, I have a few of those units and I took a photo of one of them. So yeah, we're gonna cover some open source hardware topics as well. Here is the photo. Okay. So now let's continue with the news. And by the way, there is a chat feature for the live streams. So if anybody is watching, if you have any comments, any remarks, please share that you're here. My channel is not very popular, so I don't expect much of attention. But yeah, if someone is here watching live, please give a sign that you're here. So the first news is that GitHub Article Vote 2020 that was previously announced is actually happening. GitHub is preserving open source software for future generations. The idea is that at the beginning of February, on 2nd of February, GitHub captured a snapshot of every active public repository and preserved it in the so-called GitHub Arctic Vote code vault. The data will be stored on food film reels with a lifespan of, this is unbelievable, but yeah, 500 years. It's gonna be stored in a non-functioning, I think it's a coal mine or something that GitHub bought, and there they will store for many years the existing open source software as of the moment that is hosted in GitHub. The technology for storing this is provided by a Norwegian company, Pykio, that is specialized in very long-term data storage. You can check in GitHub details. After the live stream, below the video, I'll publish a link where you can see some photos as well as a video that GitHub published in YouTube. I believe it was in November last year. So you can see the whole process, and there in the North Pole in the very north part of the world is also the bank of seeds. So the world is keeping there the seeds to prevent to make sure that they will exist if something really bad happens on the Earth. And now with this initiative by GitHub, we can also preserve the same way the open source software. GitHub added an RT-Code Vault contributor badge to all users who have contributed to an archived open source project. I mean archived project in the terms of a project that has been selected by GitHub for this GitHub RT-Code Vault. With my friends, we were discussing which project made it. Initially, there were some rumors that GitHub will pick up some really significant projects. However, over the time, they actually decided to store all active projects, not only those who are with a lot of stars or a lot of contributors. So log in GitHub, have a look at your profile, and maybe you see this RT-Code Vault contributor. If you have created a GitHub repository, Git repository in GitHub, most probably you made it. One more thing about GitHub, actually GitHub also is rolling out a new feature, a feature for README files for developers, so you can make your GitHub profile better looking and customize it. This is a way how you can attract attention as a developer, because nowadays with LinkedIn and GitHub, I think that nobody needs a CV. You can just go, or at least a software engineer, you can just go to his LinkedIn, see the companies where he has worked for, and you can have a look at the source code that the person has contributed, and you know what he's working on. Of course, I'm speaking primarily for people working on open source projects, because there are a lot of super talented developers who unfortunately are not contributing to open source project at the moment. However, I hope that in the near future this is gonna change. Hey, we have someone replying in the comment section. Thank you very much. It's great to hear that someone is actually watching. So let's get back to the slides. Linus Torvalds is a man who has an opinion. He is the creator of the Linux kernel, as well as the Git, one of the living geniuses of our time, and he has things to say. At the end of June, there was an embedded Linux and open source conference organized by the Linux Foundation. It was supposed to be in Texas because it was the edition for North America. However, due to the situation with COVID-19, Linux Foundation moved to a virtual event, and Linus Torvalds had a keynote with Greg. They were answering some questions. So he mentioned something that has been already discussed in the Linux kernel mailing list, but if you have missed it, and of course keeping an eye on the Linux kernel mailing list nowadays requires a lot of time because there are so many contributors. So Linus Torvalds entered the discussion about the introduction of Linux kernel in-tree Rust support. So probably in near future, it will be possible to use the Rust programming language for writing kernel modules. We'll see how this works. If you're interested in technical details, you can find out more details in the mailing list. I'll try to post a link in the description of this live stream after the end of the live stream, so you can just get back here and follow the link. Also, Linus made an interesting comment about an Intel technology, again in the Linux mailing lists. So he said, I'll just quote it, I'll just read it. I'll read what he said. You know that he is a person with an opinion, and sometimes his words can hurt. So I'll just read what he wrote. I hope the advanced vector extension 5112 dies a painful death, and that Intel starts fixing real problems instead of trying to create magic instructions to then create benchmarks that they can look good on. Right, this is a quote. This is a quote from an email that he sent in the mailing list. So clearly Linus is not happy with what Intel is doing, and he's definitely not a fan of the AVX 512. This is not the first time when Linus speaks not so positively about a certain technology or a certain company. But yeah, this guy is a genius, so we should listen what he says, because there is a lot of important things that we can learn from his words. And speaking about computers, in the end of May, Linus Torvalds shared with ZDNet the configuration of the desktop PC he's using. Actually, I've missed that information back then, so I saw it recently and I decided to include it in this live stream. So his configuration is quite powerful. It's not a budget machine. It's with AMD. Are you surprised considering his latest command about Intel? So he's using an AMD Ryzen Threadripper 3970X, and I had a look at this CPU. Wow, it's amazing and quite expensive. It's the moment the price is about $2,000 US, which is, wow, quite a lot. The motherboard is Gigabyte. He's using 1 terabyte of a Samsung SSD, 32 gigabytes of RAM memory. Have a look at the article to learn which are the fans that he's using, because Linus Torvalds is known to be really annoyed by noises. So he likes to have a configuration that is quiet. In this article, he's mentioned that he didn't want to use liquid cooling, so instead he bought several fans that have great capabilities and are not too noisy for his taste. So yeah. Another interesting thing is that Linus Torvalds mentioned that his preferred GNU Linux distribution for this particular desktop configuration is Fedora 32. So yeah, Linus Torvalds is using Fedora. Now, since we started the talk about GNU Linux distributions, let's have a look at Debian. Debian 9.13 is now available as the final update of the Debian GNU Linux distribution version 9 stretch series. Of course, Debian 9 is quite outdated nowadays, because Debian 10 Buster was released last year and Debian 9 was actually released in 2017. So this is the final release of Debian 9, 3 years, actually even more than 3 years, because it was released in June and now it's July. So this is the final release of Debian 9, and users of Debian 9 are now encouraged to upgrade to Debian 10 to continue to receive security support. The next major version of Debian will be called Bullseye, and it's expected in 2021. This is going to be Debian 11. Ubuntu also has some interesting news. As you know, Ubuntu is GNU Linux distribution, quite popular. I'm using it on my computer, and actually I'm using it right now for this stream. I'm running OBS on top of Ubuntu 20.04. So Ubuntu is another GNU Linux distribution heavily based on Debian, which is developed by a company called Canonical. And there are some news coming from Canonical as well as from the whole Ubuntu ecosystem that I've summarized on this slide. So Mir version 2.0 has been released. Mir is a computer display server. Initially, it was developed by Ubuntu and Canonical to replace X11. However, over the years, Mir didn't play the role that they were hoping. So nowadays, Mir became a Wayland compositor. So Wayland, for those of you who are not familiar, Wayland is a modern replacement of X11. Actually, it's I think that nowadays Wayland has more than 10 years of existence. So Wayland is the graphical display protocol, and in order to have it working on your computer, you need a compositor. The reference compositor provided with Wayland is Weston, and now Mir is also a compatible Wayland compositor. Also, Canonical and Google announced that they are working together to bring the Flutter application toolkit made by Google to Ubuntu and GNU Linux distributions. And this will be involved with Mir, probably. However, this is just an announcement. We will see how things will work out. But considering that both Canonical and Google are huge companies with enormous engineering talent, I believe that soon we will see something being available for end users in this field and developers. There is a question actually. David is asking, hi, where are you from? Well, I'm born, living, and based here in Plovdiv, Bulgaria. Plovdiv is the second largest city in Bulgaria. Bulgaria in general is a small country in Eastern Europe, and probably you have already noticed this considering my English accent. So I'm not a native speaker. Sorry if my English is not good enough. More news. KDE Plasma 520 will support screen recording, screencasting on Wayland. Yeah! I have been waiting for this for quite some time. I've already explained you about Wayland. I'm a huge fan of Wayland because I think the future deserves something better than X11. Although most of the time I'm still using X11 because most of the applications that I use have some issues, for example, like recording or screencasting on Wayland. So KDE Plasma now has the protocol coverage based on Pipewire for allowing the management of video feeds and requesting output window streams. With this, many applications, for example, OBS, which I'm using right now for this stream, OBS Studio, will now be able to record the screen under Wayland. This feature will be available in KDE Plasma release 5.20, and at the moment we are having the stable release is 5.19, so we will have to wait for a while until we get this. And I've also put a little bit of information about Wayland on this slide, but I've already discussed it with the previous news, so I hope you're already up to date what Wayland is and why it's so important for me and for the whole community, of course. So now moving on to containers, the hot topic of the recent years. So SUSE will acquire Rancher Labs. SUSE, the German company working on various open source projects, will enter into a definitive agreement to acquire Rancher Labs. The acquisition is expected to close by the end of this year. Rancher is one of the leading enterprises Kubernetes management platforms. So this is probably exciting news for everyone interested in containers and using products by SUSE. Moving on with the next news. Again, it's a Linux related news. It's about Wine. Wine is something that I'm sure most of the people watching this live stream are already familiar with. This is a free and open source compatibility layer to run applications developed for Windows to run on Linux, or, well, actually to run on Unix-like operating system, but in most of the cases it's made to run on GNU Linux distributions. And recently Wine sorry, there seems to be some it seems that there was some kind of a minor stream issue. I'm back, so just to make sure that we've covered this news, so Wine 5.13 has been released. It brings various bug fixes, including a bug fix for a 15-year-old bug to support Windows anti-ini files to registry remapping. Isn't that great? It's been like 15-year-old bug and now it's fixed. I personally don't use Wine because I have for more than a decade, I've switched entirely to using Linux on all my computers except one, which is with it's a very old Mac Mini, which I'm still keeping with an old version of Mac OS. I don't have any Windows PCs running, so I'm in a situation where I don't depend on any software that is not running on Linux. I have to show off about this. Now, moving on to the next topic that I would like to cover, Unity. Unity is a very popular cross-platform game engine. It's written in C++ with a primary scripting API in C#. It's super popular for game developers, especially for indie game developers. I'm not among them. I don't play computer games apart from very simple computer games that run in my browser, or some very old games from the 80s and the 90s. However, Unity is a big thing for all those of you interested in playing or making games, especially indie developers. So Unity 20.1 was released this month, or actually just 3 days ago. It brings numerous fixes for the Vulkan graphics API and Linux platform support. So playing games on Linux is something that was science fiction back in the days. Now it's something that is actually happening. It's reality, and a lot of people are playing games on Linux, playing games and developing games. Moving on to some news about Thunderbird. Are you using Thunderbird? I still do. Thunderbird is not very actively developed nowadays. However, it is still my preferred free and open source cross-platform email client. It's being developed by the Mozilla Foundation. The development started back in 2003. And Thunderbird 78 is the newest extended support release. They do once per year such a release. It contains some minor changes. I still haven't upgraded my Thunderbird to version 78, but I'll probably do it in the coming months. So the compose window has been redesigned. Mozilla published instructions about these changes in a blog post on their website. The Lightning Calendar and Tasks add-on has been integrated in the application itself, and there are various UI changes and bug fixes, including for end-to-end encryption of emails. So if you are using encryption in your emails, read the blog post by Mozilla before updating, because there might be required some configuration changes. Now, moving on to topics involving more hardware, I would like to discuss Linux laptops. Of course, nowadays you can run Linux on pretty much any laptop on the market. However, there are some companies making specifically laptops shipped with Linux. And I'll cover two of these companies, which both of them this month announced new models with AMD Ryzen CPU. Tuxedo Pulse 15, it's a 15-inch non-glare full HD IPS panel with a configurable CPU, AMD CPU, and up to 64 gigabytes of RAM. You can use AMD Ryzen 7 Renoir there. And also KDE Slimbook has been announced. It can be used with the same high-end mobile processor by AMD Ryzen 7 Renoir, again up to 64 gigabytes of memory, 3 USB ports, USB-C and HDMI output. Both of those laptops are shipped with Linux. That's the special about it. And another laptop which we covered in the previous edition of the open source video blog in more details, the MTN Reform. It's an open source do-it-yourself laptop kit that is manufactured by a German company. They made a crowdfunding campaign. This campaign has ended very successfully. They raised a lot of money. A lot of people bought this laptop. It's a very interesting laptop. It's gonna come with Linux, and it's with Olimex 8 system on a chip. Very different from the other two laptops that you see on this page. So yeah, MTN Reform is something super interesting, especially if you are a maker, if you would like to use an open source laptop, open source not only as a software that runs on it, but also as open source hardware. Continuing with open source hardware projects. So there is a new project, again a crowdfunding campaign that is going on right now, but it has been, so far it has been super successful. So it's a campaign by Cooler Master, and it's related to Raspberry Pi 4. They made this great looking case with cooling options for the Raspberry Pi 4. You know that the Raspberry Pi 4 is heating a lot, especially if you want to overclock it. It becomes the temperature becomes a huge problem. So Cooler Master know how to cool things. I'm using a Cooler Master case for my desktop, by the way. So they made this crowdfunding campaign. I believe it's run from one of their European offices. I might be wrong, but I think it's the office from the Netherlands. They have already gathered a lot of money. You can find a link in the description. The case looks great. The Raspberry Pi 4 fits perfectly in it, thanks to this redirection of the 40-pin header. You can use the GPIOs, and you can even attach heads to the Raspberry Pi. You can see how it looks here. You can also mount it on the back of your monitor, because it's compatible with VESA mounts for monitors. Really cool case if you would like to use the Raspberry Pi as a desktop replacement. And actually, this is one of the purposes of the Raspberry Pi Foundation. I recently watched a video interview with Eben Upton, who was speaking about that the Raspberry Pi Foundation thinks that the Raspberry Pi 4 is a desktop computer. That's why they have two HDMIs, because now with the Raspberry Pi 4 you can attach two monitors, and having two monitors nowadays is something that people often use. Moving on to another open source hardware related topic, it's the PolarFire System on a Chip Icicle Kit. This is a low-cost developer kit from Microchip's PolarFire System on a Chip, a low-power FPGA integrated with the hardened quad-core 64-bit RISC-V microprocessor subsystem. So yeah, that's true. We have finally FPGA and RISC-V coming together. And for anyone following the open source hardware news, I'm sure that this is something exciting. This is not the first time we are seeing an FPGA board. Actually, in the past 5 years, there have been an explosion on the market. So many FPGA solutions, so many of them are open source hardware. Also, we have already seen RISC-V microprocessors on the market, including those capable of running Linux. However, today we have something completely new, integrating together two of the hot topics, FPGA and RISC-V, together in one kit. PolarFire System on a Chip is the world's first FPGA and Linux capable RISC-V system in a single chip. It's available at Crowd Supply. The pricing is starting from about actually the price is about $500 US. And if you are living outside the United States, you may need to add a little bit extra for the shipping costs. And moving on again to my neighbors from Plovdiv. Earlier in the chat window, I saw a question, someone asking where I'm from. As I said, I'm from Plovdiv, Bulgaria, and Olimex are good friends and neighbors. They are working on something completely new. It's called Tuhua. Tuhua in our native language, Bulgarian, means brick. This is the exact translation to English. So Olimex new project Tuhua is a complex open source hardware development board with IMX system on a chip with up to 16 gigabytes of RAM, eMMC, and with different sizes. Olimex is using KiCad, the free and open source software tool KiCad, to design this board. Designing such a board is a very complex process. It requires a lot of knowledge. Olimex already had it because they have been on the market for this type of embedded Linux development boards for almost a decade. They have very skilled engineers that know how to design boards on several layers, because this is going to be a PCB with probably, I don't know, maybe 6 or 8 layers, something like this. AMX8 is an expensive system on a chip. It's very capable, so I don't expect this to be a very affordable board, but it's gonna be great to have it. They don't know, Olimex don't know how long will it take to finish the design. They say it may take 6 months or even more, so To be honest, I don't expect this thing to appear on the market in 2020, but fingers crossed, they'll release it at the beginning of 2021. And if you remember from the previous episode of the open source video blog, I've mentioned that Olimex are also working on another exciting open source hardware development board with STM32MP1. This is going to be significantly, in my opinion, my expectation, it's going to be a significantly less expensive than the IMX8 board because STM32MP1 is the first system on a chip by STM microcontrollers capable of running Linux, and it's available at significantly, actually surprisingly affordable prices. So I expect that Olimex will release on the market first the STM32MP1 development board, and probably at the beginning of 2021 they will offer this IMX8 solution. And the Open Source Hardware Association is the entity looking after open source hardware. As you know, a lot of people claim that, hey, we have open source this or that. However, sharing just the PDF doesn't make something open source hardware. In software, it's quite easy to figure out which project is truly open source and which is not. However, it's not exactly like this in the open source hardware, because basically you need to have all the design files which allow you not only to manufacture the thing but also to modify it. And the Open Source Hardware Association is looking after this. They are also organizing the Open Source Hardware Summit. The Open Source Hardware Certification Directory offers a free service for open source hardware certification. I often use them because I develop a lot of open source hardware things. Last month, actually this month, we still haven't wrapped up July, but so far in July, the Open Source Hardware Association certified 30 new projects coming from the UK, the US, Bulgaria, Germany, Mexico, Indonesia, Taiwan, Mauritius. I'm not sure the last pronunciation, but you know the country. Well, it's fantastic to see that actually nowadays we have open source hardware movement expanding to the whole world, and people from all around the world, engineers and individuals and companies certifying open source hardware products that other people can modify, make, and even sell. I have highlighted a few projects that are, in my opinion, interesting out of these 13. Of course, all of them are interesting, but there are 3 that attracted my attention. The first one is the Continuous Non-Invasive Blood Pressure Research Platform, ACG and PPG, post-arrival time-based. I'll post a link. It's obviously a long title, but this is something interesting because it's an open source hardware device for the medical industry, or at least something that probably, maybe it's not a medical grade, but you can use for your own purposes at home to monitor your medical condition. StormDuino is an open source Arduino compatible development board. It's the first open source hardware from Mauritius, and here is how certification number from Open Source Hardware Association looks like. The first 2 letters are for the country, and after that you have a unique number. And since this is the first certified open source hardware from this country, it's with number 1. Another interesting thing is a Ferris, a minimalistic 34 keys ergonomic split mechanical keyboard named after the Ferris mascot. This is about Rust language. Actually, Rust language made quite a few titles last month because, as I already mentioned, Linus Torvalds was discussing the involvement of Rust in the Linux kernel, and now we have this minimalistic keyboard named after the mascot of the Rust language. Also, I created something that I'm actually using for this live stream. It's part of the testing procedure for the live stream. It is this keyboard. I don't know if you can see it. It's called Anavi MacroPad 8. It's a mini mechanical keyboard with underlined below the keyboards as well on the back. It's and also has a mini OLED screen. It's another open source hardware project that I'm working on. I'll share more details about it in the coming weeks because I'm working on crowdfunding campaign with Crowd Supply, and I hope that I will be able to gather enough money for low volume manufacturing and make a few of those that you've already seen. It's entirely open source hardware project. That's why it has been certified by the Open Source Hardware Association. Now, moving on to the last slide. Actually, we're wrapping up this episode of the open source video blog with coming open source events. First of all, starting tomorrow on Monday, there is the Rusty Days conference. If you are a Rust developer, or if you are interested in learning something new, you can subscribe and join this conference. I have a friend who is going to have a talk about using Rust in drones. So it's going to be an interesting conference that is featuring not only software but also hardware specific talks, because obviously controlling a drone requires working with a lot of hardware. Linux Plumbers conference is coming in August. I forgot to say, but the Rusty Days conference is virtual, so is the Linux Plumbers conference 2020. Those events were supposed to be physical events, but due to the worldwide circumstances, you know the story, they have switched to virtual. Also in September, in the beginning of September, KDE is making Academy. So this is not a spelling error. This is how the event is called, with K, Academy 2020. Again, it's going to be virtual. I have already subscribed to it. It's a free event, so I highly encourage you to subscribe. One of the advantages in a situation like this where we have so many problems, but still there are some advantages, and one of the advantages is that we can subscribe to virtual events like this. Another virtual event in September is Linaro Connect. It's going to happen in 22nd and 23rd of September. Again, a virtual event, and I have already subscribed to it. It's again a free event. So yeah, I highly encourage you to subscribe. Thank you very much for watching. I see that there are just a couple of people watching it, but that's fine. I'm doing this live stream just for fun. I'm still learning how to make a live stream. Sorry again for the technical issue that we have in the middle of the stream, as well as for that I'm not a native speaker, so my English isn't perfect. Obviously, there are a lot of things that I have to learn to make live streams better, and I'll be happy to hear recommendations how I can make this open source video blog better, and how to improve the live stream. So let me know if you have any questions, any recommendations below in the comments once this live stream is over, or right now in the comment section of the video. Right, let me see if there's anything. Okay, I don't see any new questions coming on. Right. Oh, thank you very much for watching once again. I hope you've enjoyed it. So the plan is, I don't have an exact plan, because once again, I'm doing this just for fun. I try to become better at live streaming and to learn new things. So I try to do it out. I will try to do it once per month. After a long pause, I've restarted the open source video blog last month in June. Now we're doing, actually, oh, there's this typo here. It's July. This is the second episode for July. Sorry for the typo. So yeah, this is the episode for July, and I'm planning to do a live stream again at the end of August. And to wrap up, interesting news related to open source project from August. August it's a vacation month, but I still hope there will be something interesting going on. Thank you very much for watching, and stay tuned for new videos, and please consider subscribing to my YouTube channel. Thank you very much.